He was told to leave the school, without warning. Without reason. No explanation. Just a quiet black kid from a poor farm. Not a good fit, they said. No one questioned it. Not the teachers. Not the students. Until the next morning, when a helicopter landed on the field. And a billionaire stepped out asking one simple question. So who really didn't belong at Redhill? Before we dive into this powerful story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep uncovering stories of dignity, justice, and second chances. Thank you. The wind carried a faint chill that morning as Jaden Brooks tied his bike to the fence post behind the school. His shoes were scuffed, his backpack threadbare, and his head stayed low. Not out of fear, but habit. Redhill Academy was quiet at that hour. Clean, orderly, the kind of quiet that made kids like him feel too loud just for breathing. In English class, he raised his hand, once. Said that fairness mattered, that's all. By lunchtime, he was gone, sent home. No meeting, no hearing, just a formality sealed behind an office door. Back at the farm, his father didn't ask questions. Jaden didn't offer answers. They bundled hay in silence while the sun sank behind the fields. Neither of them knew what was coming. Because some debts aren't measured in money. And some seeds take years before they break the ground. Until someone finally remembers to look back. On Monday morning, the iron gates of Redhill Academy swung open, one by one, as black SUVs and polished sedans rolled into the circular drive. Jaden Brooks stood a few steps away, waiting for the last of the line to pass before crossing. His backpack, frayed at the corners, hung awkwardly on one shoulder. The stitching on one strap had come loose, and the zipper barely held. Inside, textbooks wrapped in layers of old newspaper rustled each time he adjusted his footing. Jaden didn't mind the weight of the bag. He was used to it. What he noticed, more than anything, was the silence when he stepped through those gates. No hellos, no nods, just the low hum of conversations that ceased when he came close. Still, he kept walking, head high, shoes scuffed but steady. First period was English literature. Ms. Clarence, a woman with tortoise-shell glasses and a voice that could soothe a storm, wrote in tall letters across the board, privilege and social equity. The room buzzed as students whispered, amused. Then Maxon Whitmore raised his hand, though he didn't wait to be called on. Some people just don't belong in schools like this, he said, leaning back in his chair with practiced arrogance. They should be learning somewhere that fits their background. A few students chuckled. Ms. Clarence hesitated but said nothing. Jaden raised his hand, calmly, firmly. When she nodded, he stood, his voice steady. Education isn't a privilege, it's a right, and this classroom should reflect that. The silence was immediate and thick. Even Maxon looked up from his phone. Ms. Clarence blinked twice. Her hand moved toward her coffee mug but didn't lift it. No one spoke. Jaden sat down again, the room watching him now. Not with respect, but something closer to discomfort. When the bell rang, he packed up slowly, expecting nothing. But as he stepped into the hallway, a student aide tapped his arm and handed him a folded note. Principal Carr's office. Right now. He walked the length of the West Wing, his shoes tapping lightly on the polished floor. The administrative wing smelled like lemon cleaner and paper files. When he entered, Principal Richard Carr didn't look up right away. He was flipping through a folder, Jaden's folder. Sit, Carr said, still scanning. Then he looked up, locking eyes for the briefest moment before scanning Jaden from head to toe. Carr's office was lined with plaques and portraits. Photos of previous headmasters, all of them in suits, all of them white. Carr himself was mid-50s, sharply dressed, silver hair combed back with precision. His hands were folded now, elbows on the desk. I've reviewed your profile, Jaden, he said with a thin, practiced smile. Your test scores are fine. But Redhill isn't just about numbers. It's about community, about fit. Jaden didn't respond. His fingers gripped the edges of his backpack in his lap. I have to consider what kind of environment we're cultivating here. Carr continued, voice softer now, as though he were explaining something to someone too young to grasp it. We need students who reflect the values of this institution. His gaze dropped again, to Jaden's shoes, the faded collar of his shirt, the skin on his hands. Jaden stayed still, There was nothing to say that would change this man's mind. Carr closed the folder gently and pushed it to the side. You'll be hearing from our office with next steps. Jaden stood slowly. He looked at Carr once, not with anger, but with the quiet weight of someone who had seen this play out before. Without a word, he walked out, back into the hallway, where voices behind glass doors rose and fell in careless rhythms. Out on the quad, a group of students gathered near the statue of Red Hill's founder. Jaden passed by, and one of them, someone from Maxon's circle, snorted loudly enough to be heard. Laughter followed. He kept walking. Inside the main office, Carr picked up his pen, opened the file once more, and scribbled a line in the margin. Recommend dismissal, unable to integrate culturally. In the corner cubicle, Lucy Hendricks, the school registrar, watched silently. She'd been with Redhill for 22 years. Her fingers paused above her keyboard. She looked toward the door Jaden had just exited, then back at Carr's office. She didn't say anything, not yet, but something in her expression shifted, like a window cracked open just enough for the cold air to seep in. The wheels of Jaden's bike creaked over the dirt path, the metal frame groaning with every bump. He didn't rush. The silence of the ride stretched out like the gravel road ahead of him, framed by tall grasses and the wooden fence that marked the border of his family's land. The air carried the faint scent of hay and earth, a smell that usually felt like home. Today, it just felt like a reminder. His father was out by the far rows, turning soil with a worn spade. His back curved like the land itself. Lewis Brooks didn't look up right away. He rarely did. Farming taught a man to finish what was in front of him before facing what came behind. Jaden leaned his bike against the side of the barn and walked slowly toward the porch. The wood creaked under his feet, the same way it had since he was 5. That was the year the roof first leaked and the year they stopped trying to fix things that didn't threaten to fall apart. He sat on the top step, resting his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the empty field that ran past the fence line. Lewis joined him 10 minutes later, wiping sweat from his brow with a faded cloth. He didn't ask why Jaden was home early. He didn't need to. Jaden spoke without turning. They said I didn't fit. His voice was low, matter of fact, like he was reporting the weather. They said I wasn't the right kind of student for Redhill. Didn't say it straight out, but it was all over his face. Lewis didn't move. He placed the cloth on his knee and waited. Jaden glanced over, searching his father's face for some kind of reaction. A flicker of anger, maybe, a rise in his voice. But Lewis just looked at the field. I didn't argue, Jaden added. Didn't see the point. They already made up their minds. They? Lewis asked quietly. Principal Carr, Maxon, half the class. Ms. Clarence didn't say much, either. Lewis let the silence sit for a while. Then he pointed with his chin toward the horizon. You see that corner of the field, just past the old tool shed? Jaden nodded. About 15 years ago, a man showed up there. Tall, gaunt, clothes torn up by travel. He'd been walking 3 days. Hadn't eaten in 2. Said he was looking for work. Said he'd do anything. Jaden's eyes shifted, but he said nothing. I let him sleep in the seed shed for 3 nights. Fed him cornbread and beans. He didn't talk much, but he listened. Told me I was the first person who looked at him like he wasn't invisible. Jaden's throat felt tight. That story had been told once, when he was a child, barely old enough to remember. He left a note when he went. Said if he ever made it, he'd remember this place. Jaden finally turned to look at his father. What happened to him? Lewis stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. I don't know, he said. He didn't write again, but I've kept that note. He disappeared into the house. Jaden stayed on the porch, watching the breeze move over the field like it was whispering something too quiet for him to catch. Inside, the sound of a drawer opening broke the stillness. Lewis returned holding a worn envelope, corners curled with time. He handed it over without a word. Jaden opened it carefully, as if the paper might tear just from remembering. Scrawled in pen, on lined paper, was a single line. I'll never forget the man who fed me when I was no one. Forever grateful, Samuel Kingston. Jaden stared at the signature. His heart thudded once, hard. He looked up. The Samuel Kingston? Lewis nodded slowly, then sat back down beside him. The wind passed again, brushing over the field and the porch in their silence. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, unanswered. Jaden held the letter tighter in his hand, unsure what it meant yet, but knowing deep down that something had shifted. And this time, he wasn't the one who had to explain himself. The night didn't feel like a regular one. Jaden lay flat on the wooden bed he'd slept in since he was a boy, its frame creaking softly with every breath he took. The window beside him was open just a crack, letting in the chorus of crickets and the sigh of wind sweeping across the field. In his hand was the old letter his father had given him hours earlier. He had read it twice. Now he was tracing the edge of the page with his finger like it might reveal something else. Something invisible. He whispered the name to himself under his breath, not quite believing it. Samuel Kingston. The name sat heavy in the quiet room. It wasn't a name you said lightly in their part of the country. Kingston Enterprises owned more farmland than some counties. They had research labs, shipping routes, contracts with the government. Samuel Kingston was the kind of man people put in textbooks or magazine covers, not the kind who once needed shelter in a seed shed. Jaden turned to his side, voice barely above the breeze. Did you really help him? From the kitchen, where Lewis had been sipping weak tea and staring out into the dark, came a quiet voice. I did what any decent man would. Jaden sat up, waiting. After a pause, his father stepped into the doorway. No lights were on, just the faint silver of moonlight touching the lines on Lewis's face, softening the years etched by work and sun. He came from the north. No name at first, just a hungry face and a limp in his step. Said he was looking for something to do. Anything. Jaden watched him closely, the edges of disbelief fading with each word. I let him stay in the shed. Gave him food. We didn't talk much, but one night, we sat on the porch. He told me he had failed at almost everything he tried, but he still believed something would come through. I told him, you plant enough good seeds, something has to grow. Jaden swallowed hard. That sounded like his father. Lewis gave a slow nod. Next morning, he was gone. Left that note. I never expected anything back. Jaden leaned forward. You think he'll remember? Lewis didn't answer right away. He reached into the envelope again and pulled out the letter, still folded neatly despite the years. He looked at it like a man seeing an old friend from far off. Then, after a moment, he walked to the kitchen table, sat down, and started writing. His handwriting was slow, careful, the kind you used when you didn't want to get a single word wrong. I don't know if you remember me, he began, but you came to my farm once. I gave you food, a place to rest, and I never asked for anything in return. But now, my son's been shut out by a place that should have welcomed him. I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking if you still believe in giving a man a chance. He folded the letter, slid it into a new envelope, and added the old note from Samuel. I'm not mailing this, he said, too slow. He pulled out his phone, the signal flickering as usual, and typed in a name from memory, someone who worked at the local co-op, now managing logistics at a distribution branch near Kingston headquarters. She owes me a favor, Lewis said simply. The call didn't go through right away. Jaden could hear the buzz of static and failed connection. Out across the field, the wind changed. The old scarecrow leaned slightly, as if listening. By morning, a white SUV pulled into the farm's driveway. Just after sunrise, Lewis handed the envelope to the driver, nodded once, and said no more. Miles away, in a glass tower lined with green and gold marble, Samuel Kingston was paging through quarterly numbers. His tie was loose. His eyes were tired. When his assistant entered, she didn't say anything. She simply placed the letter on his desk. He glanced at the envelope. Then he froze. It wasn't the handwriting that made him pause. It was the name. Lewis Brooks. The sky above Red Hill Academy was still a soft gray when the students began gathering in neat lines across the football field. It was the school's tradition, Monday morning assembly. A ritual of flags, anthems, and carefully prepared speeches. Principal Richard Carr always looked forward to these moments. They were, in his view, a quiet demonstration of order, of control. He stood behind the portable podium now, straightening his navy tie, his polished shoes tapping a soft rhythm against the temporary platform. A folded sheet of paper rested in his hand, filled with lines he'd practiced the night before. A few notes on leadership, a reminder about upcoming standardized tests, and a closing sentence that tied everything back to Red Hill values. He glanced across the sea of uniforms, blue blazers, beige slacks, pressed skirts. Most students listened with blank eyes, phones tucked hastily into jacket pockets. Maxon Whitmore stood near the front, arms crossed, whispering something to the boy beside him. Jaden Brooks wasn't there. Miles away, Jaden was in the barn, tying twine around a stack of hay bales, helping his father before the sun climbed too high. His hands moved automatically, the way they always did during chores. But his mind was somewhere else. He kept replaying the letter, the story, the impossible possibility that the man from the field was now the man whose name appeared on half the food labels in their kitchen. Back on the school field, a distant noise began to rise. At first, it was subtle, a low thrum that could have been mistaken for a tractor or distant roadwork. But it grew louder, sharper, until conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned upward, the sound carved through the sky. And then it appeared. A sleek, dark helicopter sliced across the clouds, its rotor blades hammering through the morning stillness. Students backed up instinctively, hair whipped into faces. The flag on the pole bent sideways. Principal Carr froze mid-sentence. The helicopter descended slowly, deliberately, its landing skids touching down in the middle of the field, right between the scoreboard and the bleachers. Security guards rushed forward, unsure whether to intervene. No one had been informed of any visit. Carr's lips parted but no words came. His fingers curled tightly around his speech. The cabin door opened. A man stepped out. He wore a dark brown overcoat and walked with the kind of calm that needed no explanation. Not tall, not broad, but something in the way he moved made space around him. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked. Samuel Kingston. Some students recognized him instantly from business magazines. Others from the ads that played during Super Bowl halftimes. But even those who didn't know his name could feel the shift in air around him. His eyes swept across the field, not searching, but measuring. When he reached the edge of the field where the school's motto was painted, Red Hill Academy, cultivating tomorrow's leaders, he stopped. He stared at the sign for several long seconds, jaw tightening ever so slightly. Inside the administration building, the front desk phone rang sharply. A secretary picked up, listened, then stood and walked briskly toward Carr's office. "Sir," she said breathlessly, knocking once. "You're needed outside, right now." Carr frowned, annoyed by the interruption, but the note of urgency in her voice made him set down the speech and grab his blazer. As he stepped outside, the sound of the rotor blades had just begun to fade. What greeted him was a semicircle of students, murmuring staff, and one of the most powerful men in American agriculture standing at the center of the field. Carr's walk slowed halfway there. He tried to mask the confusion, forcing a polite smile, one hand already extended. "Mr. Kingston," he called out, voice too loud, too forced. What a surprise. Kingston didn't take the hand. He looked Carr directly in the eye, then turned, facing the gathered crowd. No microphone, no podium, just his voice, clear and even, carried by the wind. "I came here today for one reason," he said, pausing between words, "to ask this school why a black child, whose father once gave me shelter when I had nothing, was removed from a place that claims to stand for equity and enlightenment." A silence fell heavier than any storm. Students stopped fidgeting. Teachers stopped whispering. The wind stilled. Carr's face drained of color. His hand fell to his side. No one moved. Not yet. But the ground had shifted. No one moved. The wind had quieted, as if it too had paused to listen. The students of Red Hill Academy stood frozen on the field, their uniforms fluttering only slightly, their eyes bouncing between Principal Carr and the man who had just shattered their morning routine. Carr emerged from the building with a practiced gait and a diplomatic smile. But the edges of his mouth didn't quite hold. His eyes betrayed the confusion and something else, hesitation. His gaze scanned the faces in the crowd, then stopped on Samuel Kingston. Kingston stood calmly, his overcoat catching the light breeze, his hands folded loosely in front of him. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. Carr reached him with a firm hand extended, his tone overly bright. "Mr. Kingston, We weren't expecting. I know, Kingston interrupted, his voice even. I didn't come for a tour. There was an audible shift among the crowd. The tone, the pace, everyone felt it. Kingston wasn't here for a visit. He was here for something else entirely. Carr tried to regroup. Well, if this is about one of our students, I'm sure there's a process. Kingston turned slightly to address the crowd again. In 1997, he began. I was lost. I was cold. I had no job, no home, and no reason to believe anyone would give a damn. I stumbled into a field, not too far from here, and a man named Lewis Brooks took me in. He didn't ask who I was or what I could offer. He just handed me a bowl of food and a place to sleep. The students were silent. Even Maxon Whitmore looked uncertain now, shifting from foot to foot. That man, Kingston continued, never asked for anything in return. He said, everyone deserves a gate to walk through. 25 years later, I received a letter from his son, Jaden Brooks. He paused, long enough for it to settle in. And that letter told me that Jaden had been removed from this school. Not because he failed, not because he broke any rule, but because he didn't fit. Carr's voice cut in, sharper now. With all due respect, Mr. Kingston, we make decisions based on academic behavior and integration. It's never personal. Kingston turned to him, gently but with weight. This isn't about integration. It's about integrity. Carr blinked. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. From the edge of the field, a single voice rang out. It was soft at first, almost unsure. He's right. Heads turned. Lucy Hendricks, the registrar, stood with her hands clasped in front of her. Her posture was firm, but her voice trembled slightly. I was in the office when Jaden was called in. He wasn't disrespectful. He didn't misbehave. He was calm, thoughtful. All he did was speak up in class. The next thing I knew, Principal Carr had written a recommendation for withdrawal. A few murmurs rippled through the teachers. Carr's eyes snapped toward her. Lucy, he began. She shook her head, voice stronger now. I've worked here over 2 decades. I've seen who gets second chances and who doesn't. And I've stayed quiet for too long. But this was wrong. She looked down briefly, then back at the crowd. Jaden didn't fail this school. This school failed him. The field was utterly still. No one clapped, no one cheered, but something shifted in the collective breath of the group, an exhale of recognition. Kingston took one step forward. I didn't come here to shame anyone, he said, quieter now, but I did come to make something clear. He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a document. It was a copy of a funding agreement. This is a preliminary pledge for next year's infrastructure budget. $10 million. But let me be very clear. He looked Carr in the eye. Either you issue a public apology and reinstate Jaden Brooks with full standing and dignity, or that pledge ends here. For the first time that morning, Carr didn't mask his reaction. His face slackened. A muscle in his jaw twitched. In the crowd, students glanced at one another. Teachers lowered their eyes. One of the flagpoles clanged softly in the wind, like a quiet chime breaking through the silence. And nobody spoke. Not yet. For a moment, Principal Richard Carr stood as if carved from stone. His spine was straight, but the strength behind it had drained away. The murmurs had quieted. The crowd waited, not just for a response, but for an answer. Not just for words, but for reckoning. He knew there was no spinning this. Not with Samuel Kingston standing 10 feet from him. Not with students whispering behind their hands. Not with staff members casting sideways glances that had never existed before. Carr walked toward the platform slowly, as if the air had thickened around him. When he reached the microphone, he paused longer than anyone expected. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted it, then settled at his side. He began, and for once, his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, but the tremble didn't go away. I want to address what has happened, and what has not happened. A breeze passed through the field, nudging the Red Hill banner at the edge of the bleachers. It fluttered like it too was listening. The decision to remove Jaden Brooks was not made with fairness, Carr said. It was not made in alignment with the values we claim to uphold at Red Hill Academy. And it was mine. He stopped, searching the crowd. His eyes met no one in particular, and that seemed to make the words harder. I offer my apology to Jaden Brooks, and to his family. What was done was wrong. There was no applause. Not yet. But a quiet energy rippled through the group, a shift. A tension unspooling. At the far edge of the crowd, someone moved. Jaden. He had arrived during the last few minutes. Walking in from the school gate without anyone noticing. He wore his oldest shoes. The backpack with the frayed strap still slung over one shoulder. His presence was quiet, but it drew every eye. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He simply stood there, watching. Kingston saw him first. He didn't say anything, just lifted one hand, palm facing inward, like a signal. Jaden met his eyes, then walked forward. The walk from the edge of the crowd to the front of the platform felt longer than it was. Every step carried weight that didn't come from the ground. Some students parted to let him through. Others just stared, their faces unreadable. When Jaden reached the platform, Carr stepped down. The principal extended a hand. Jaden looked at it. Then he bowed his head, once. Respectfully. But didn't lift his hand to meet it. Carr's arm hovered in the air a second longer. Then fell back to his side. The silence held. Then a single clap broke it. Then another. Then many. It wasn't raucous. It wasn't triumphant. It was measured. Like a moment finally being named out loud. Some students clapped. Some teachers. Others just stood still, watching the boy they had almost erased walk back into the place he'd been told he didn't belong. Maxon Whitmore stood near the front. His mouth was closed. His eyes didn't meet Jaden's. But as Jaden passed, Maxon shifted slightly, almost stepping forward, almost saying something. He didn't. Jaden didn't stop. Beneath the podium, Kingston reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't make a show of it. Just walked to Jaden and placed the paper gently in his hand. "This is the first scholarship we're offering under a new program," Kingston said. "It's called the Justice Leadership Fellowship." He met Jaden's gaze. "If you're ready, the gate is open." Jaden didn't answer right away. He looked down at the paper, then up at the school building. He didn't smile. Not yet. The crowd around them remained still. The morning sun just beginning to stretch over the tops of the trees. The warmth of it reached the boy who had once been left outside the gate. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel cold. Jaden didn't move at first. The paper in his hand, creased neatly where Mr. Kingston had folded it, felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. The offer wasn't just about opportunity, it was a declaration that someone had seen him. Had seen the truth of him, even when others refused to. He stood at the edge of the platform, surrounded by faces. Some were familiar, some not. Many had watched him from afar, through narrowed eyes and whispered judgments. Now, those same faces looked at him with a mixture of curiosity, uncertainty, and something else he couldn't name. Jaden didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply stepped down. The wind passed through the rows of students, tugging at ties, lifting strands of hair, bending the flags overhead. It touched Jaden's shoulders too, brushing against the worn fabric of his shirt, the one he'd almost outgrown but never asked to replace. He walked with slow, quiet steps through the sea of onlookers. At the far end of the field, his father stood like part of the land, solid, still, eyes locked on his son. Jaden reached him, stopped just a few feet away. Lewis didn't move, didn't say a word, but there was a softness in his expression that hadn't been there earlier that morning. Pride, yes, but also something older, something deeper. Jaden slipped the paper into his pocket. He looked up at the man who had taught him, without ever needing to say it. That silence can be stronger than shouting. From the building, Carr had retreated quickly. The door to his office closed with a quiet thud. And inside, the noise of the field faded behind walls. He pulled the knot of his tie loose with one hand, then sat down heavily in the chair behind his desk. His eyes found their way to the mirror that hung across from his seat, a decoration he'd once installed to make the room feel bigger. What he saw now wasn't power, wasn't authority. It was a man who, for the first time, couldn't defend himself with policy or precedent. A man who'd hidden behind rules and realized, in public and in full view, that those rules had failed someone who never should have been excluded in the first place. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands pressed together, and let out a breath that had been building for longer than he realized. In the hallway, Maxon Whitmore leaned against the lockers. His blazer was still perfectly pressed. His shoes spotless. But the smugness, the casual arrogance that usually lived in his walk, had slipped away. He looked up as Jaden passed. They didn't speak, but for the first time, Maxon didn't try to look down on him. His eyes met Jaden's, only for a second, and in that second was something unspoken. A shift, perhaps, or just a recognition that something had ended between them, and something else had begun. He turned to leave, stopped, looked back, but still said nothing. Jaden didn't stop either. Later that afternoon, back in her modest corner office, Lucy Hendricks opened her email. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before she began to type. The subject line was simple: today. We remembered. She wrote a few short paragraphs. She mentioned Jaden by name. She acknowledged what had been overlooked. She thanked Mr. Kingston not just for the donation, but for reminding Redhill why it had been built in the first place. She clicked send. The email spread faster than she expected. It was forwarded, then quoted. It showed up printed on the faculty bulletin board by evening. In the following days, conversations began, quietly at first, behind closed doors and in planning meetings. Some staff members who had never spoken about admissions policies asked harder questions. One history teacher pulled out old records and started comparing them. Another proposed a new mentorship program. Eventually, a special board meeting was called. On the surface, it was a routine gathering. But inside the conference room, the tone had changed. A few faculty members, ones who had rarely spoken up, began suggesting revisions to the admissions framework. More flexibility, greater outreach, real accountability for who got overlooked and why. Jaden wouldn't hear about the meeting until much later. But by then, the seed had already been planted. And though he didn't know it yet, it was his quiet walk, his refusal to strike back, his bowed head in the face of injustice, that had started something no one at Redhill could quite put into words, but none could deny had taken root. A week had passed since the silence at Redhill had been broken. And the winds on that football field still echoed in Jaden's thoughts. But today, the wind was quieter, the air cooler, and the view entirely different. No longer open skies above a field, but glass walls and clean corridors. Jaden stepped into the lobby of Kingston Enterprises with his parents beside him. His heart beating like he was standing at the edge of something too wide to see all at once. He had worn the best shirt he had, one without frayed cuffs, and he had tried to flatten the crease in his pants, though the stubborn fold had curled back by the time they arrived. Lewis didn't seem fazed by the polished floors or the security guard who nodded as they passed. His faded button-down, the same one he wore to town meetings and Sunday service, looked strangely dignified in the sea of suits. He walked slow, with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. They were greeted at the elevator by a young woman named Regina. She wore a maroon blazer and knew Jaden's name before he introduced himself. She led them upstairs, where the walls were lined not with awards or stock charts, but with framed portraits, some black and white, some in color, of people, farmers, factory workers, engineers, all with short stories beneath their images. Samuel Kingston met them outside the boardroom. No assistant, no entourage, just him, in a navy suit without a tie, his eyes warm with recognition as they shook hands. "I'm glad you came," he said, then turned to Lewis with a smile. "And especially you." Lewis gave a simple nod. "Didn't plan to," Jaden insisted. Kingston chuckled, but there was a weight behind it. They sat together at a long wooden table. Nothing too sleek or modern. Jaden noticed the way Kingston leaned forward when he spoke. Not in performance, but like a man trying to close the distance between his past and his present. "I wanted you to meet some people," Kingston said, waving in a group from the hallway. They entered in pairs. A woman with salt and pepper hair who had once been denied a loan because of her last name. Now head of regional development. A man who grew up in foster care. Now leading their logistics team. No one mentioned Jaden's story. No one pitied him. They just spoke to him like someone they saw something in. When the others left, Kingston remained behind with the Brooks family. He turned toward a wall bearing a large frosted glass panel with the words etched in silver. "Future Leaders Fellowship. You don't need to answer today," Kingston said gently. But this program is yours if you want it. Jaden walked toward the panel. His reflection stared back, older. Somehow, than it looked a week ago. The light caught the word, future, and stretched it across his chest. He turned around slowly. I want to be part of it, he said, but not just for me. Lewis raised his eyebrows slightly. Jaden took a breath. There are kids who'll never get this chance. Kids like me who won't even make it past the front door because of what they wear, where they're from, or what they look like. I want this fellowship to mean something for them, too. Kingston nodded, quietly. When it was time to go, Kingston stood and reached out his hand again, not like a benefactor, but like someone passing on a responsibility. Jaden shook it firmly. Lewis watched them. His hand slipped into his pocket, tightening just slightly, then relaxed again. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. As they headed for the elevator, a staff member handed Jaden a small envelope. Inside was a badge with a lanyard. The lettering clean and bold. Intern. Justice Leadership Program. He held it in his hand, ran a thumb over the raised print, and smiled, not wide, but steady. As they exited the building, Jaden glanced back one last time. Behind the glass doors, on the far wall of the lobby, hung a large black and white photo. A younger Lewis Brooks stood beside a rusted tractor, laughing with his sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. There was no caption beneath his name, just a single line. Every field needs someone who believes in planting. Jaden didn't say a word, but he walked through that door like he had always belonged. He didn't raise his voice, but somehow, the air around him changed. Just one boy, standing still, holding a folded paper, while the system that shut him out blinked. Maybe some doors don't open with noise. Maybe they open when someone dares to knock, knowing they might not be heard. And still, they knock. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, or even just a pause, subscribe to Undercover Truths for more stories that echo long after they end. Thank you for watching.